I watched my manipulative coworker take complete credit for my grueling year of coding, smiling as the CEO promoted him. So, when the entire proprietary system inevitably crashed under his watch, I sat back, locked my terminal, and watched him drown. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The fluorescent lights of the clinic waiting room buzzed with a low, oppressive hum that seemed to vibrate perfectly in time with the pounding behind my eyes. I was 38 years old, but as I sat slumped in the stiff plastic chair, waiting for the doctor to read my EKG results, I felt like a hollowed-out shell. My hands, resting in my lap, were trembling slightly, a lingering side effect of the exhaustion, the endless caffeine, and the panic attack that had finally forced me into the emergency room at 4 in the morning. I was a lead systems architect, and for the past 14 months, my entire existence had been reduced to glowing lines of code on dual monitors. I had built Project Aegis from the ground up. It was a completely revolutionary back-end database architecture designed to save our firm from catastrophic data bottlenecks. It was my baby. It was the reason I hadn't slept a full night in a year, the reason my personal life was non-existent, and the reason my chest currently felt like it was trapped in a tightening vice. My phone, resting on the seat beside me, vibrated. The screen illuminated, casting a harsh blue glare across my pale skin. It was a text message from Lydia, a senior developer on my team and one of the few people who actually understood the immense sacrifices I had made. Lydia, tell me you are not looking at your email right now. Abigail, please tell me you haven't seen it. My breath hitched. My fingers, still shaking, reached for the device. I unlocked the screen, swiping away Lydia's message to open my company inbox. At the very top, marked with a bright red exclamation point denoting high priority, was an unread message from Weston, our CEO. The subject line read, "A new era of engineering. Congratulating our new director, James." I blinked, the words blurring together as my exhausted brain struggled to process the information. James? James was my peer, a glorified project manager who barely knew the difference between Java and JavaScript. He spent his days organizing unnecessary meetings, curating sleek PowerPoint presentations, and taking Weston out for expensive lunches to discuss synergy. He hadn't written a single line of code for Project Aegis. He hadn't stayed up until 3:00 a.m. debugging memory leaks. He hadn't sacrificed a damn thing. I tapped the email. Weston's words flowed across the screen, a sickening waterfall of corporate praise. It is with immense pride that I announce the promotion of James to Director of Engineering. Over the past year, James has shown unparalleled vision and technical mastery, single-handedly conceptualizing and delivering Project Aegis. His brilliant architectural design will carry this company into the future. Please join me in congratulating him on this monumental achievement. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The sterile walls of the clinic seemed to close in on me. I scrolled down, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. There was a photo attached, James and Weston shaking hands in the executive boardroom. James was wearing his trademark custom-tailored suit, flashing a perfectly manicured, predatory smile. On the screen behind them was a diagram of the Aegis architecture. My architecture. The diagram I had stayed up for 48 hours, straight to finalize just 3 days ago. He had taken it. He had taken all of it. He had presented my agonizing, grueling labor as his own brilliant vision, and Weston had bought the lie completely hook, line, and sinker. I was left with a broken body, a racing heart, and nothing else. The betrayal was far more agonizing than the physical collapse that had preceded it. I didn't go back to my apartment after the doctor prescribed me beta blockers and mandated a week of strict rest. I couldn't. The injustice was a physical burning sensation in my stomach, Overriding the exhaustion in my bones, I drove straight to the office. The glass doors of the engineering floor slid open with a soft hiss. The usual hum of keyboards and low conversations completely died out as I walked down the main aisle. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. Lydia met my gaze from her cubicle, her face pale, giving a slight, helpless shake of her head. I ignored the sympathetic stares. I marched straight toward the corner office, the office that was sup. O's to be mine. The nameplate had already been changed. Crisp, bold, black letters on brushed silver, James, Director of Engineering. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open. James was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk, leaning back in an ergonomic leather chair, casually scrolling through his phone. He looked up, unbothered, his perfectly styled hair catching the morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Abigail," he said, his voice dripping with an artificial, practiced warmth. "I heard you were under the weather. You really should be resting, champ. The team needs you at 100%. I closed the door behind me, the heavy wood clicking shut with an ominous finality. "You stole my work, James." My voice was quiet, raspy, but it cut through the air like a serrated blade. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. James sighed, a patronizing, heavy exhale, as if he were dealing with a petulant child. He placed his phone face down on the desk and folded his hands. "Abigail, let's not be melodramatic. We are a team. We collaborated on Aegis. I provided the high-level strategic oversight, the market alignment, the executive interface. You executed the technical details. We both played our parts. You didn't write a single line of code," I stated, stepping closer to the desk, planting my hands firmly on the polished wood. "You didn't design the data structures. You didn't build the asynchronous routing. You took the presentation I sent you for review, slapped your name on the title slide, and pitched it to Weston while I was literally in the hospital." James's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. The charming veneer vanished in an instant, revealing the calculating opportunist underneath. And who do you think Weston was going to listen to? A stressed-out, socially awkward coder who can barely string a sentence together in a board meeting, or me? I speak their language, Abigail. I sell the vision. You're a brilliant mechanic, sure, but I am the architect of this company's future. Weston sees that. Now, as your director, I suggest you take your sick leave, calm down, and return ready to maintain the system. Don't make this difficult for yourself. He was dismissing me. He had stolen my masterpiece, climbed over my exhausted body to take the corner office, and now he was ordering me to quietly maintain the very engine he had stolen. He was completely confident in his victory. He believed he had won, that he had securely stolen the keys to the kingdom. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. He had stolen the blueprints, he had stolen the credit, and he had stolen the title. But he didn't actually understand how the machine worked. To understand the depth of James's theft, you have to understand exactly what I gave up for Project Aegis. I didn't just work overtime, I surrendered my life to this company. When Weston, the CEO, came to the engineering floor 14 months ago, panicking about our legacy servers failing under the weight of new client data, I was the one who stepped up. Weston, a man who saw everything in terms of profit margins and stock value, demanded a miracle. He wanted a custom, proprietary data pipeline that could process millions of transactions a second with zero latency. I promised him I could build it. I spent Thanksgiving alone in my apartment, eating cold takeout while writing routing algorithms. I missed my sister's wedding because the legacy database started fracturing, and I had to apply emergency patches while simultaneously building the new architecture. I sacrificed my health, my relationships, and my sanity. And while I was drowning in the trenches, James was positioning himself perfectly. James was 40 years old, a man whose entire career was built on the illusion of competence. He didn't have an engineering background, his degree was in communications. He spoke in a relentless stream of corporate buzzwords, synergizing paradigms, leveraging agile deliverables, optimizing bandwidth. He wore bespoke Italian suits to a casual tech office. He made sure he was always the loudest voice in the room, always the one standing next to the whiteboard nodding thoughtfully, even if he had no idea what the equations meant. His strategy was simple and insidious. He attached himself to my project. He insisted on scheduling daily syncs where I would explain the technical progress to him so he could translate it for the C-suite. I was too exhausted, too focused on the code, to realize what he was actually doing. I was feeding him the exact ammunition he needed. He took my highly technical, complex explanations and distilled them into flashy slide decks. He took Weston golfing, casually dropping technical terms he had learned from me the day before, painting himself as a visionary leader steering a difficult, unruly engineering team. He cultivated a narrative where I was just a worker bee, a fast typist, while he was the mastermind orchestrating the grand design. And it worked. Weston loved James. Weston loved the polish, the confidence, the firm handshakes, and the illusion of total control. Weston didn't care about the thousands of hours of unseen labor. He only cared about the presentation. Standing in that corner office, looking at James's smug face, the reality of my situation crystallized. I had built a fortress, and he had simply walked in and changed the locks. He had convinced the king that he was the architect. I slowly pushed myself off his mahogany desk. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten him. I just looked at him, really looked at him, taking in his expensive tie, his perfectly styled hair, and the absolute lack of technical comprehension behind his eyes. "Okay, James," I said softly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You're the director. It's your system now. I hope you know how to drive it." I turned on my heel and walked out of the office, ignoring his satisfied chuckle. I walked straight to my desk, packed up my personal belongings, and locked my workstation. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, the crushing weight in my chest began to lift, replaced by something entirely different. It was cold. It was calculating. It was the absolute certainty of my revenge. For the first 48 hours of my mandated sick leave, I did absolutely nothing but sleep. My body, deprived of rest for over a year, completely shut down the moment I locked the door to my apartment and collapsed onto my mattress. When I finally woke up on Wednesday morning, the sun was streaming through my blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the quiet air. The frantic, vibrating energy that had consumed me for 14 months was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow silence. But as I sat at my small kitchen table, staring into the dark surface of my black coffee, the cold, calculating realization of my situation began to take root. James thought he had won. He thought software engineering was like painting a house. Once the final coat was on, you just handed over the keys and walked away. He thought the system was a finished, static product. He didn't understand that Project Aegis was a living, breathing ecosystem, and it was currently holding its breath. I walked over to my home office setup and booted up my personal, heavily encrypted workstation. I connected to the company's virtual private network. As a lead systems architect, my administrative privileges were hard-coded into the very foundation of the network. James, in his arrogant rush to claim the corner office, hadn't even thought to revoke my access. He probably didn't even know how to find the administrative control panel. I opened the back-end monitoring dashboard for Aegis. The system was currently humming along smoothly, processing the standard, everyday data loads. But I knew something that James and Weston and the rest of the executive board did not. I knew about the Sentinel protocol. During the final, sleep-deprived weeks of development, I had discovered a critical flaw in the way our hardware handled massive, sudden spikes in data requests. If the load exceeded 95% of server capacity, the entire database architecture risked complete, irreversible corruption. To prevent a catastrophic loss of client data, I had coded a deeply embedded failsafe, the Sentinel protocol. If the system hit that 95% threshold, Sentinel would instantly freeze all incoming data streams, locking the entire architecture down into a protective stasis. It was the digital equivalent of dropping blast doors. The catch: because James had relentlessly pushed for an early deployment so he could present it at the quarterly executive board meeting, I never had the time to write the user interface or the documentation for the Sentinel override. If the system locked down, there was no button to click to turn it back on. The only way to thaw the system, rebalance the data load, and safely restart the servers was through a highly complex, manual command line sequence. It required a 64-bit encrypted key and a specific syntax of algorithmic commands that existed nowhere in the company wiki. They existed only in my private, secure sandbox environment and in my own head. I smiled, a slow, cold curving of my lips. I didn't need to sabotage the system. I just needed to let James drive it until it inevitably ran out of gas. And according to the company calendar, Weston had scheduled the onboarding and data migration of our largest new enterprise client for this coming Friday. That migration would absolutely trigger the Sentinel protocol. My phone buzzed. It was Lydia. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away from my apartment. When she arrived, she looked exhausted, clutching a massive iced latte like a lifeline. "It's a nightmare, Abigail," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "James is strutting around the floor like he's Steve J. Obs, he's already scheduled 3 press releases about his innovative architectural design. But the moment a developer asks him a specific question about the API endpoints, he just spouts some nonsense about leveraging agile synergies and walks away. He doesn't know what an API endpoint is, Lydia," I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "Let him strut. Tell me about the Friday migration." Lydia groaned, rubbing her temples. "Weston wants it expedited. He wants the new client fully integrated by Monday morning. We warned James that the data volume is too high to push through all at once without a phased approach, but he told us to stop creating roadblocks and just optimize our bandwidth." "Perfect," I whispered. Lydia looked at me, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "Perfect. Abigail, if we push that much data through the main pipeline at once, the servers are going to scream." "I know," I replied, leaning forward, my voice dropping to a low, intense murmur. "Lydia, I need a favor. I need you to stay completely out of the blast zone on Friday. Do not offer solutions. Do not try to fix anything. When it breaks, and it will break, I want you to document every single thing James does, or more accurately, every single thing he fails to do. Can you do that?" Lydia stared at me for a long moment, the realization slowly dawning on her face. A small, wicked smile began to form on her lips. "I can definitely do that." I went back to my apartment and spent the next 12 hours building my case. I pulled the master logs from the Git repository, the digital ledger that tracked every single line of code ever written for the project. I downloaded the complete history, highlighting the undeniable fact that James's username had exactly 0 contributions. I compiled every email where I had painstakingly explained basic engineering concepts to him so he wouldn't embarrass himself in front of clients. I was no longer a victim weeping in a hospital waiting room. I was a strategist, meticulously preparing the battlefield. I returned to the office on Thursday morning, one day before the massive data migration. The atmosphere on the engineering floor was incredibly tense. Developers were speed-walking between cubicles, holding urgent, whispered conversations. The low hum of anxiety was palpable. I walked to my desk, calmly booted up my computer, and began reviewing my emails as if nothing had happened. Within 20 minutes, a company-wide notification popped up on my screen. Weston was calling an emergency, touch base, meeting in the main glass-walled conference room. Attendance for all senior staff was mandatory. I grabbed my notebook and walked into the conference room, taking a seat at the far end of the long, polished table. Weston sat at the head, looking stressed, tapping a gold pen against his notepad. James stood at the front of the room, positioned perfectly next to a massive digital whiteboard. He was wearing a new, sharp navy suit, looking every bit the confident executive. "All right, let's get started," Weston said, his voice tight. "We have the massive Apex Corp data migration happening tomorrow. The board is watching this very closely. James, I want assurances that Aegis is ready to handle the load. We're already seeing some latency warnings on the dashboard this morning. James flashed his trademark, reassuring smile. He picked up a dry erase marker and drew a large, meaningless circle on the board. Nothing to worry about, Weston. The latency you're seeing is just standard operational friction. As we scale the paradigm, the system is simply learning to leverage the new bandwidth parameters. I've instructed the team to synergize the cloud routing protocols, which will seamlessly handle the Apex data drop tomorrow. The room was dead silent. The actual engineers in the room, including Lydia, were staring at James with a mixture of horror and second-hand embarrassment. It was a word salad of epic proportions. It meant absolutely nothing. I didn't raise my hand. I simply spoke, my voice clear and carrying perfectly across the silent room. It's not operational friction, James. It's a memory leak in the secondary cluster. Every head in the room snapped toward me. Weston stopped tapping his pen. James's smile faltered, his hand freezing midair near the whiteboard. "Excuse me, Abigail," James said, his voice taking on a sharp, warning edge. "I thought you were still on sick leave. Perhaps you aren't fully caught up on my latest architectural adjustments." "I don't need to be caught up to read a dashboard, James," I replied, holding his gaze without blinking. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. The latency is caused by garbage collection overhead in the Java virtual machine. The system is struggling to clear old data from the temporary memory banks. If we push the Apex data through tomorrow without reconfiguring the heap size, the servers won't just experience friction. They will hit a hard bottleneck. Weston frowned, looking back and forth between us. He didn't understand the technical jargon, but he understood tone. He understood that I was diagnosing a specific, critical illness, while James was prescribing positive thoughts. "James," Weston asked, his tone cautious. "Is she right? What is our strategy for this? Garbage collection overhead." James's face flushed slightly, a faint red creeping up from his collar. I could see the panic flashing behind his eyes as his brain scrambled for a lifeline. He had no idea what I had just said. He didn't know what a Java virtual machine was. He was completely exposed in front of the CEO. James stammered, clearing his throat and adjusting his expensive tie. "We will simply allocate more cloud bandwidth to the server farm, Weston. We'll throw more processing power at the issue. It's a simple fix. Abigail, as a developer, you sometimes miss the forest for the trees. You're focusing on micro-level coding issues when I am managing the macro-level strategy." It was a pathetic deflection, and from the slight narrowing of Weston's eyes, I could tell the seed of doubt had been firmly planted. Weston nodded slowly, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "Make sure it's handled, James. Failure tomorrow is not an option." The meeting dismissed. As I was walking toward the break room to get a cup of tea, a hand shot out, grabbing my upper arm and pulling me roughly into the small, empty kitchenette. It was James. His charming facade was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating, furious mask. He backed me against the counter, towering over me, his voice dropping to a vicious, trembling whisper. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Are you trying to humiliate me in front of Weston? Do you have any idea how replaceable you are, Abigail? You're a code monkey. I am a director. If you ever speak out of turn in my meeting again, I will fire you before you can blink. I will ruin your career in this industry. Do you understand me?" I looked at his shaking hands. I looked at the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He wasn't projecting power. He was projecting sheer terror. He knew he was out of his depth, and he was terrified that I was going to pull the rug out from under him. I didn't flinch. I calmly reached up and removed his hand from my arm, gripping his wrist firmly. "You can't fire me, James," I said softly, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "Because tomorrow, when you push that data, the system is going to break. And when Weston asks you to fix it, you're going to realize that you can't read a single line of the language it speaks. Enjoy your corner office while it lasts." I stepped around him and walked back to my desk, leaving him standing alone in the break room, pale and trembling. By Friday morning, the tension in the office had escalated into a full-blown crisis environment. The Apex Corp data migration had officially begun at 8:00 a.m. I sat quietly at my workstation, a fresh cup of tea in hand, watching the private monitoring dashboard on my second monitor. Beside me, sitting heavily on my desk, was a thick, black, three-ring binder. At 9:15 a.m., the warning lights on my dashboard shifted from green to yellow. The system capacity hit 80%. James was frantically pacing the center aisle of the engineering floor, a phone pressed tightly to his ear. He was bringing in outside consultants, desperately trying to get them to diagnose the slowing speeds. But I watched them look at the server architecture, shake their heads, and walk away. Aegis was proprietary. It was highly complex. Without my underlying documentation, it was like trying to read a novel written in a lost, dead language. At 10:30 a.m., James sent out a frantic, company-wide email, formally forbidding me from accessing the core server rooms or logging into the primary database. He was trying to isolate me, terrified that I was going to sabotage the system to prove my point. He didn't realize the sabotage was already built into his own ignorance. While James was spiraling, Lydia and I had spent the previous evening finalizing our investigation. Lydia had performed a brilliant piece of digital detective work, tracking down a former colleague of James's from his previous company on LinkedIn. We had arranged a secure video call with him late Thursday night. The colleague, a woman named Sarah, had told us a story that mirrored mine flawlessly. James had attached himself to her massive user interface overhaul, learned the buzzwords, presented her wireframes to the executives as his own, and secured a massive bonus and title bump. When the UI began to suffer from massive integration bugs, James blamed Sarah for sloppy execution, fired her, and quickly resigned to take the job at our company before the executives realized he didn't know how to fix the mess he'd created. Sarah Sworn signed. Testimony, along with the email trails proving his theft at his last job, was currently resting inside the thick black binder on my desk. Alongside it were the Git logs showing my 10,000 lines of code versus James's 0. At 11:45 a.m., the sirens began to ring. They weren't literal sirens, but the digital equivalent. The company-wide communication channels exploded. The customer support lines lit up like a Christmas tree. On my private dashboard, the capacity meter hit 94%. Then, 95. The Sentinel protocol engaged. Instantly, my screen froze. The data streams flatlined. Across the office, developers groaned in unison as their terminals locked up. The entire proprietary database architecture dropped its blast doors to protect the data, effectively bringing the entire company to a screeching, catastrophic halt. The digital heartbeat of the firm stopped. "What happened?" someone yelled from across the room. James ran out of his corner office, his face entirely devoid of color. "Reboot the servers. Someone restart the clusters," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "We can't," Lydia shouted back, staring at her screen. "The system is entirely unresponsive. It's completely locked us out. It's a hard freeze." My desk phone rang. It was Weston's executive assistant. "Abigail, Weston needs you and James in his office. Right now." I picked up the black binder, feeling the solid, heavy weight of the truth in my hands, and walked calmly toward the executive suite. James was already there when I walked in, pacing furiously in front of Weston's massive desk. Weston looked completely unglued. His face was red, his tie was loosened, and he was gripping the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles were white. "The board is calling me every 2 minutes, James," Weston roared as I closed the door behind me. "Apex Corp is threatening to pull a multi-million-dollar contract because our revolutionary system just crashed their entire data pipeline. What is going on?" James instantly pivoted, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. It's her, Weston. It's Abigail. She built a faulty foundation. I've been trying to patch her sloppy, broken code all week, and she intentionally left bugs in the architecture because she was jealous of my promotion. She sabotaged us. Weston turned his furious gaze toward me. Is this true, Abigail? Did you break the system? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself against the accusation. I walked forward, stopping right in front of Weston's desk. I looked at James, who was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with desperate malice. Then I looked at Weston. The system isn't broken, Weston, I said, my voice cutting through the panic with chilling clarity. It's performing exactly as I designed it to. It locked itself down to prevent a total data wipe because the load was poorly managed. I lifted the heavy black binder and dropped it onto the center of Weston's desk with a resounding thud. And James hasn't been patching my code, I continued, staring directly into the CEO's eyes. Because James doesn't know how to code. He doesn't know how to read the language. He stole my work, he stole the credit, and now he has absolutely no idea how to turn your company back on. Open the binder, Weston. Weston looked at the binder, then at James's terrified face, and finally he reached out and flipped open the cover. The spell was about to break. Weston's hand trembled slightly as his fingers brushed the thick, rigid cover of the black binder. The heavy silence in his private executive office was suddenly deafening, completely isolating us from the frantic, muffled shouts of the engineering floor just on the other side of the glass. The air felt thick, charged with the kind of static electricity that precedes a massive, destructive lightning strike. James was breathing shallowly, his chest rising and falling in rapid, erratic jerks. The pristine, confident posture he had cultivated for 14 months was entirely gone, replaced by the cornered, twitching body language of a man who suddenly realized the floor beneath him was made of glass, and it was beginning to crack. Weston, don't listen to her, James pleaded, his voice thin and reedy, devoid of its usual booming resonance. He took a hesitant step toward the desk, his hands reaching out as if to physically intercept the binder. She's unstable. She's been on medical leave for a mental breakdown. You cannot possibly take anything she says seriously. This is a desperate, pathetic attempt from a jealous employee to sabotage my career. Weston did not look at him. His eyes remained locked on the black cover for a long, agonizing moment before he slowly, deliberately flipped it open. The first page was a master summary I had typed up, detailing the exact timeline of Project Aegis's development, cross-referenced with my hospital visits and James's expense reports from his long, leisurely lunches. Weston read it in silence. Then he turned the page to the core evidence, the Git repository logs. What am I looking at, Abigail? Weston asked, his voice low, a dangerous, quiet rumble that I had never heard from the CEO before. You are looking at the foundational DNA of Project Aegis, Weston, I replied calmly, keeping my posture straight and my hands folded neatly in front of me. Those are the cryptographic commit logs. Every single time a piece of code is written, modified, or deleted in our system, the developer's unique digital signature is permanently stamped onto it, along with a timestamp. It is an immutable, unforgeable ledger. There are over 70,000 lines of backend code that make up the architecture you praised in your company-wide email. I took a slow step forward, pointing a single finger at the dense columns of text on the page. My digital signature, Weston, is on 69,842 of those lines. The remaining 100 or so belong to Lydia and the junior developers who assisted with minor front-end integrations. I paused, letting the silence stretch, turning my head to look directly at James. His face was no longer pale. It had turned a sickly, mottled shade of gray. If you scan through those 50 pages of logs, Weston, I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity, you will find that James's digital signature appears exactly 0 times. He has never committed a single character of code to this project. He has never logged into the development server. He has never even opened the software required to read the language the system is written in. She faked them, James suddenly shouted, his voice cracking violently, spit flying from his lips. He lunged forward, slamming his hands onto Weston's desk. She's a hacker. She went into the system and deleted my name. She scrubbed my contributions to make me look completely incompetent. Weston slowly raised his head, his eyes cold and hard as flint. He looked at James's sweating, panicked face, and then he looked back down at the binder. He turned another page. If she faked these, James, Weston said quietly, then explain this next tab. These are forwarded emails from your private company inbox. My heart hammered a steady, triumphant rhythm against my ribs. I had included every single correspondence where James had begged me to explain the most basic, entry-level concepts of systems architecture, so he wouldn't look like a fool in front of the clients. On October 12th, Weston read aloud, his voice dripping with sudden, heavy disgust. You emailed Abigail at 11:00 p.m. asking her to, and I quote, explain the difference between a server and a cloud so I can synergize the talking points for tomorrow's pitch. On November 5th, you asked her to write a script for you to read during a board meeting because you didn't understand what an API was. You literally copied and pasted her replies into your own slide decks. Weston flipped past the emails to the final, thickest section of the binder, the affidavit. And then there is this, Weston said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. A sworn, notarized letter from a woman named Sarah Jenkins, your former lead UI designer at your last firm. She details a nearly identical situation. You attached yourself to her project, learned the corporate buzzwords, presented her wireframes to their C-suite as your own, and took the promotion. When the integration failed because you didn't understand the underlying code, you blamed her, fired her, and fled the company before they could audit you. That is a lie, James screamed, his composure completely shattering into a million jagged pieces. He was hyperventilating now, pacing wildly back and forth across the carpet. That is slander. I will sue her. I will sue you, Abigail. You are all trying to ruin me because you can't handle a true visionary leader. Weston stood up. He didn't just stand. He rose from his chair with a slow, imposing menace that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. He bypassed his desk and walked over to the heavy glass doors of his office. He pulled them open. The frantic noise of the engineering floor rushed in, phones ringing endlessly, executives shouting from the hallways, developers arguing in panicked clusters. The entire company was watching the catastrophic failure unfold, and now they were all looking directly at Weston's open door. Come with me, James, Weston ordered. It was not a request. Weston marched out of his office and directly into the massive, central glass-walled conference room in the middle of the floor. James followed him like a condemned man walking to the gallows, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting wildly for an exit. I walked in behind them, feeling the collective gaze of 50 panicked employees fixating on us. Lydia was standing near the front, her eyes wide, holding her breath. Weston walked to the massive, digital whiteboard at the head of the room. He slammed his hand against the red, emergency override button on the communication console, instantly patching the room's audio and video feed directly into the board of directors' emergency conference call that had been holding on line 1. The massive screens flickered to life, showing the confused and angry faces of the company's major investors. Gentlemen, Weston said into the microphone, his voice echoing across the silent engineering floor. We are currently experiencing a catastrophic system lockdown. Our new director of engineering, James, is here to fix it. Weston turned to James, crossing his arms over his chest. He gestured toward the master terminal keyboard sitting on the conference table. The system is down, James, Weston said, his voice loud, clear, and utterly merciless. The board is watching. The entire engineering floor is watching. You are the visionary. You are the architect. You built this system. Turn it back on. James stared at the keyboard as if it were a coiled, venomous snake. His hands hung limply at his sides. He looked at the massive screens displaying the furious board members. He looked through the glass walls at the faces of the developers he had spent the last 2 weeks talking down to, insulting, and threatening. He looked at me, standing calmly by the door, completely unbothered by the chaos. James stammered, his voice so quiet it barely registered on the microphone. I need my team to. No, Weston interrupted, his voice cracking like a whip. Your team doesn't understand the high-level macro strategy, remember? You told me they were just code monkeys. You told me you designed the architecture. If you designed it, you know how to unlock it. Type the command sequence, James. Thaw the servers. Save the client. James took a shaky step toward the keyboard. He raised his trembling hands, hovering his fingers over the keys. The entire room held its breath. The silence was absolute, heavy, and completely suffocating. For 10 agonizing seconds, James stared at the blank command prompt on the screen. He didn't know how to initiate a secure shell protocol. He didn't know how to query the database. He didn't even know what language the terminal was waiting for. Slowly, his hands dropped back to his sides. A wet, pathetic sob tore its way out of his throat. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too big, hanging off a hollow, fraudulent shell of a man. I can't, James whispered, tears of sheer humiliation springing to his eyes. I don't know how. The collective gasp from the engineering floor was audible even through the thick glass walls. On the video feed, the board members began shouting in outrage. Weston looked at James with a level of disgust, so profound it seemed to physically push the man backward. You are a parasite, James, Weston said, his voice devoid of anger, replaced by a chilling, absolute finality. You are a fraud, a thief, and an active liability to this firm. You are fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from this building, and our legal team will be contacting you regarding the fraudulent bonuses you accepted under false pretenses. 2 large security guards, who had clearly been summoned by Weston's assistant, stepped into the conference room. They flanked James, each taking one of his arms. James didn't fight them. He was completely broken, staring blankly at the floor as they practically dragged him out of the room, parading his public, humiliating downfall past the very employees he had manipulated and abused. The heavy glass doors of the conference room swung shut, cutting off the sight of James's disgraceful exit. The room was still dead silent, save for the frantic, distorted voices of the board members echoing from the video screens. The multi-million-dollar Apex Corp data migration was still entirely frozen. The company was still bleeding money by the second. Weston slowly turned his back on the screens and faced me. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading to reveal the deep, stress-induced lines around his eyes. He walked over to me, stopping just a few feet away. For the first time since I had met him, Weston, the untouchable CEO, bowed his head. Abigail, Weston said, his voice thick with genuine, profound remorse. I was blind. I was arrogant, and I was completely dazzled by a shiny presentation. I allowed a con artist to steal your life's work, and I rewarded him for it while you were literally working yourself into the hospital. There are no words sufficient to apologize for the gross negligence I have shown you. I failed you as a leader. I looked at him, feeling the tight, agonizing knot that had lived in my chest for the past 14 months finally, miraculously, begin to dissolve. I didn't need him to grovel, but I needed him to acknowledge the truth. I needed to hear it spoken aloud. You did fail. Me, Weston, I said simply, my voice calm but uncompromising. I bled for this company, and you handed my blood to a vampire because he wore a nicer suit. Weston flinched, nodding slowly. You have every right to walk out that door and let this company burn to the ground. And if you do, I will ensure you receive a severance package that reflects the absolute maximum of your worth. But, if you are willing, is there any way to save the system? I looked past him, glancing through the glass at Lydia, who was giving me a small, encouraging nod. I looked at the dark screens, the frozen data pipelines, the massive, sleeping beast of an architecture that I had built with my own 2 hands. It was my system. It belonged to me. The Sentinel protocol requires a 64-bit encrypted decryption key, followed by a specific syntax of asynchronous routing commands to safely bleed the excess data load into the secondary clusters. I stated, my voice slipping easily back into the comfortable, complex language of my craft. It will take me approximately 4 minutes to execute. Weston's eyes widened with a desperate, sudden spark of hope. Name your price, Abigail, anything. First, I said, holding up a single finger. I am the director of engineering. The corner office is mine. My salary is immediately doubled, retroactive to the day Project Aegis began. Second, Lydia is promoted to lead systems architect with a commensurate pay raise. Third, I have complete, unquestioned autonomy over the engineering budget and hiring practices. No more corporate buzzwords. No more empty suits. We hire builders and we let them build. Weston didn't even hesitate. He didn't consult the board. He simply extended his hand. Done. I will have the legal team draft the contracts within the hour. I didn't shake his hand right away. I walked past him, stepping up to the master terminal at the head of the conference table. I pulled out the chair and sat down. I rested my fingers on the cool, mechanical keys. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, taking a deep breath, feeling the phantom exhaustion of the past year finally wash away, replaced by a surging, powerful current of pure vindication. I opened my eyes and began to type. My fingers flew across the keyboard in a rapid, rhythmic clatter. Line after line of complex, elegant syntax cascaded across the massive digital whiteboard for the entire room to see. I wasn't just typing commands, I was speaking to the machine in a language only the two of us truly understood. I entered the 64-bit key. I executed the final routing loop. I hit the enter key with a sharp, definitive crack. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the red warning lights on the monitoring dashboards across the entire engineering floor simultaneously blinked back to a calming, stable green. The system hummed. The data pipelines thawed. The massive backlog of Apex Corp data surged forward, not in a chaotic, destructive wave, but flowing smoothly and safely into the perfectly reconfigured secondary clusters. A cheer erupted from the engineering floor, a loud, genuine, deafening roar of relief and triumph. Developers were clapping, hugging each other, and pointing at the green screens. Lydia was practically jumping up and down, tears of joy streaming down her face. Even the angry voices of the board members on the video feed shifted into stunned, breathless murmurs of approval. Project Aegis was alive, and it was perfect. The aftermath was swift and uncompromising. James's downfall was not just localized to our company, it was absolute. With my new authority, I reached out to my extensive network of lead engineers and technical recruiters across the city. I shared the signed affidavit from Sarah, along with the undeniable proof of his technical illiteracy. The tech industry is a small, closely knit community when it comes to the people who actually do the work. Within a week, James was completely blacklisted. No reputable firm would even grant him a phone screening. Desperate and facing massive legal fees from Weston's aggressive countersuit to recoup his fraudulent bonuses, James was forced to sell his expensive downtown condo and his luxury car. The last I heard, he had moved out of the state entirely, taking a low-level, entry-level project management role at a minor retail chain, stripped of his suits, his titles, and his stolen glory. 3 months later, the company was thriving. Project Aegis was the crown jewel of our firm, processing data flawlessly and bringing in record profits. I was sitting in my corner office, the late afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm, golden glow over my mahogany desk. I wasn't hunched over a keyboard, fighting back a panic attack. I was leaning back in my comfortable chair, sipping a cup of chamomile tea, quietly reviewing Lydia's brilliant new architectural proposals for the upcoming quarter. My health had returned. The dark circles under my eyes were gone. I was finally sleeping through the night. I looked around the quiet, spacious room, listening to the faint, distant hum of a perfectly optimized, flawlessly executing system. I took a slow, deep breath, smiling softly to myself. The fortress was secure, the fraudulent king had been dethroned, and the true architect was finally resting comfortably in her rightful place.